The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, cream-colored cardstock with gold lettering that screamed expensive. Marcus Wellington and Victoria Ashford request your presence. I stared at the date, September 15th, exactly 3 years to the day since. I'd supposedly died in that car crash in Montenegro. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My hands trembled as I set the invitation on my kitchen counter in the small coastal town of Millfield, Oregon, where I'd been living under the name Elena Rodriguez for the past 3 years. The irony wasn't lost on me that my killer was now getting married, probably believing he'd successfully eliminated the only witness to his embezzlement scheme, Marcus Wellington. Even seeing his name in elegant script made my chest tighten with a mixture of rage and something I refused to call longing. 3 years ago, he'd been my fiancé, my business partner, and the man I'd trusted with both my heart and my family's pharmaceutical company, Blackwood Industries. Now he was marrying Victoria Ashford, the governor's daughter and the perfect political wife for a man with Marcus's ambitions. I walked to my bathroom mirror and studied the face staring back at me. Gone was Isabel Blackwood's signature auburn hair, replaced by dark chocolate brown that fell in loose waves past my shoulders. Colored contacts had changed my distinctive green eyes to warm hazel. A subtle nose job had altered my profile just enough, and 3 years of careful weight management had given me a different silhouette entirely. Even my own mother wouldn't recognize me, if she were still alive to try. The plastic surgeon in Prague had done excellent work, as had the document forger in Berlin. Elena Rodriguez had a complete history, birth certificate, social security number, employment records, even a tragic backstory about fleeing an abusive marriage. The identity had cost me nearly everything I'd managed to salvage from my Swiss accounts before Marcus could freeze them, but it had kept me alive. My phone buzzed with a text from my only friend in Millfield, Grace Chen, who ran the local bookstore where I worked part-time. Coffee later? You look like you need to talk. Grace had an uncanny ability to read people, probably from years of recommending books based on customers' moods. She didn't know who I really was, nobody did, but she'd become the closest thing to family I had. In this carefully constructed new life, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I texted back, rain check? Something's come up. Something was an understatement. Marcus's wedding was in 6 days, taking place at the historic Rosewood Estate in Napa Valley. The same venue where we'd planned to hold our own wedding 4 years ago. Before everything went to hell. I pulled out my laptop and began researching. The guest list was public, a who's who of California's political and business elite. The ceremony would be covered by Society magazines, with photos splashed across social media. Marcus had always loved being in the spotlight, and marrying Victoria would launch him into the political stratosphere he'd always craved, but there was something else in the announcement that made my blood run cold. The obituary section of the wedding program included a memorial for beloved friends and family who couldn't be with us today. My name was listed first, Isabel Blackwood, taken too soon in a tragic accident. Her memory lives on in our hearts. The audacity was breathtaking. He was memorializing the woman he'd tried to murder while celebrating his new beginning with her family's stolen fortune. I closed the laptop and walked to my bedroom closet, pushing aside the modest clothes of Elena Rodriguez until I found the hidden panel in the back wall. Inside was everything I'd managed to save from my old life, copies of financial documents, photographs, and most importantly, the flash drive containing evidence of Marcus's systematic embezzlement of over $50 million from Blackwood Industries. I'd been gathering evidence for months before I'd planned to confront him, documenting how he'd been funneling money through shell companies and fake contracts. The night I'd decided to present my findings to the board, Marcus had suggested we take a romantic getaway to Montenegro to reconnect, before the stress of wedding planning consumed us. I should have known it was a trap. The car crash had been expertly staged. The remote mountain road, the convenient brake failure, the 30-foot drop into the ravine. If I hadn't insisted on stopping for gas and accidentally overheard Marcus on the phone confirming that accident would happen on schedule, I would have died that night instead of the local woman who'd been paid to drive my rental car while I hid in the trunk of Marcus's vehicle. Yelena Pavlovich had been a single mother desperate for money. Marcus had told her it was an elaborate insurance scam, that the car would be safely recovered after the staged crash. He'd never intended for her to survive, and her death haunted me every day. I'd tried to save her, tried to warn her, but by the time I'd escaped from Marcus's car, it was too late. The explosion had been visible for miles. I'd used Elena's identification to cross the border, then made my way across Europe using the emergency funds I'd hidden in various accounts. It had taken me 6 months to obtain my new identity and another year to work up the courage to return to the United States, settling as far from California as possible while still being able to monitor Marcus's activities. For 3 years, I'd watched him rebuild his life on the foundation of my family's company and my supposed death. He'd played the grieving widower perfectly, channeling sympathy into business opportunities and political connections. My uncle Robert, who'd inherited control of Blackwood Industries, had been all too happy to sell Marcus his shares at a discount. Believing he was helping his late niece's fiancé honor her memory, now Marcus was about to marry into one of California's most powerful political families, cementing his transformation from ambitious businessman to untouchable elite. Victoria Ashford was beautiful, connected, and completely unaware that her fiancé was a murderer who'd built his fortune on stolen money and fabricated grief, but I knew. And I had proof. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app, staring at my transformed reflection on the screen. 3 years of careful planning had led to this moment. I'd built a new identity, established clean financial accounts, and most importantly, I'd gathered additional evidence of Marcus's ongoing crimes. His success had made him careless, and his political ambitions had left a paper trail that connected him to corruption schemes I'd never imagined. The question now was what to do with the invitation. I could ignore it, continue living as Elena Rodriguez in my quiet coastal town, and let Marcus have his happy ending while Yelena Pavlovich remained an unnamed casualty of his greed. It would be the safe choice, the smart choice. Or I could accept the invitation and attend his wedding. The thought sent a thrill of fear and anticipation through me. Walking into that ceremony would be the ultimate risk, if Marcus recognized me, if my disguise failed, if any of the guests from my old life saw through my transformation, I'd be signing my own death warrant. But it would also be the perfect opportunity for justice. After all, what better time to reveal the truth than when he was surrounded by society's elite, standing at an altar in front of cameras and witnesses, declaring his love for another woman, while memorializing the one he'd murdered. I picked up the invitation again, running my fingers over the elegant script. The honor of your presence is requested, my presence. The ghost of Isabel Blackwood returning to haunt the man who'd killed her. I walked to my laptop and opened a new browser window, typing in the address for a high-end boutique in San Francisco. If I was going to crash Marcus Wellington's wedding, I was going to do it in style. After all, every ghost deserved a memorable entrance point. 3 hours later, I'd ordered a stunning black dress that would arrive by overnight shipping, booked a room at a luxury hotel near Napa Valley, and researched every detail of the Rosewood Estates layout. I'd also transferred money from my carefully maintained accounts to ensure I could disappear again if things went wrong. As the sun set over Millfield's rugged coastline, I sat on my small apartment's balcony and raised a glass of wine toward the ocean. This one's for you, Yelena, I whispered to the wind. Time to make him pay. The ghost of Isabel Blackwood was about to return from the dead, and Marcus Wellington's perfect new life was about to become his worst nightmare, because when someone announces your death at their wedding, walking in during "Speak Now or Forever Hold Your Peace" sends a message that transcends any vows they might be making. The message is simple: the dead don't stay buried when they have unfinished business, and I had 3 years' worth of unfinished business to settle. The black Valentino dress arrived Thursday morning, wrapped in tissue paper that crinkled like secrets being unwrapped. I held it up to the light streaming through my apartment window. It was perfect. Elegant enough for a high society wedding, dramatic enough for a resurrection. I was scheduled to leave for San Francisco that evening, but first I had one final errand in Millfield. Grace was expecting me at the bookstore, and I owed her at least a partial goodbye, even if she'd never understand the real reason for my sudden departure. The bell above Chen's books chimed as I entered, the familiar scent of old paper and coffee wrapping around me like a comfortable blanket. Grace looked up from behind the counter, her dark eyes immediately narrowing with concern. You look different, she said, setting down her inventory clipboard. Something's changed. Grace had always been too perceptive for my own good. Over the past 3 years, she'd become expert at reading the subtle shifts in my mood, the careful way I deflected questions. About my past, the way I sometimes stared out at the ocean as if I were searching for something lost. I have to leave town for a few days, I said, running my fingers along the spine of a mystery novel. Family matter. Family? Grace's eyebrows rose. In 3 years, I'd never mentioned having family. Everything okay? I met her gaze, and for a moment I was tempted to tell her everything. Grace Chen was probably the only person in the world who genuinely cared about Elena Rodriguez's well-being, and I was about to abandon that identity forever. It's complicated, I said finally. There's something I should have dealt with a long time ago. Grace came around the counter, studying my face with the intensity she usually reserved for rare book appraisals. Elena, if you're in some kind of trouble, I'm not, I interrupted, then caught myself. Not the kind you're thinking of, anyway. She nodded slowly, as if filing away information for later analysis. When will you be back? The question hung in the air between us. If everything went according to plan, Elena Rodriguez would cease to exist after Saturday. If things went wrong, well, Isabel Blackwood might be joining her in oblivion. I don't know, I admitted. Grace, if something happens to me, stop. She held up a hand. Whatever this is about, whatever you're planning, just promise me you'll be careful. You've got good instincts, Elena. Trust them. I pulled her into a hug, breathing in the familiar scent of jasmine perfume and book dust. Thank you, I whispered. For everything. When I pulled away, Grace's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Come back safe, okay? The store's not the same without you. I left Millfield at sunset, driving my modest Honda Civic toward San Francisco. With a suitcase full of carefully chosen clothes and a heart full of conflicting emotions. The 3-hour drive gave me time to rehearse my plan, to consider every angle and potential complication. The St. Regis Hotel welcomed me with the kind of understated luxury I'd once taken for granted. The desk clerk smiled politely as I checked in under the name Elena Rodriguez, never suspecting that the woman in the simple sweater and jeans had once commanded boardrooms and charity galas. My suite overlooked Union Square, and I stood at the window watching the evening crowd navigate the busy streets below. Tomorrow I would begin my transformation back into Isabel Blackwood, or at least, a version of her that could survive what was coming. Friday morning, I began with my hair appointment at an exclusive salon in Pacific Heights. The stylist, a dramatic woman named Celeste with purple-streaked hair and paint-splattered fingers, examined my dark locks with the intensity of a surgeon. You want to go lighter? She asked, running her fingers through my hair. That's a big change. I'm ready for something completely different, I said, meeting her eyes in the mirror. 4 hours later, I walked out with hair that perfectly matched my original auburn shade. Celeste had worked magic, layering the color so naturally that it looked like I'd been born with it. Combined with a skillful cut that framed my face, I was already beginning to look like my old self. Next came the makeup consultation at Nordstrom's beauty counter. I explained to the artist that I needed a look for a formal evening event, something sophisticated but not overdone. As she worked, painting away the last 3 years of careful disguise, I watched my transformation in the mirror. You have such striking bone structure, the artist murmured, applying contouring powder. These cheekbones are incredible. With each brush stroke, Elena Rodriguez faded and Isabel Blackwood emerged. It was unsettling and exhilarating at the same time, like watching a resurrection in real time. The final stop was a boutique that specialized in vintage jewelry. I needed the perfect accessories for tomorrow's performance, and I found them in the form of pearl earrings and a delicate gold necklace that would complement the black dress without overwhelming it. Back at the hotel, I spread my purchases across the bed and began the careful process of studying my reflection from every angle. The resemblance to my former self was striking, but not perfect. The subtle changes from my surgery were still there, and 3 years of different living had altered my posture, my expressions, the way I carried myself. I spent the evening practicing in front of the mirror, relearning Isabel Blackwood's mannerisms. The way she tilted her head when she was thinking. The slight smile that never quite reached her eyes when she was angry. The confident stride that came from years of walking into rooms full of people who wanted something from her. Saturday morning arrived gray and foggy, typical San Francisco weather that seemed appropriate for a day of reckoning. I ordered room service, fresh fruit, coffee, and yogurt that I barely touched, and began the final phase of my preparation. The black dress fit like it had been designed specifically for my body, hugging my curves in all the right places while maintaining an air of understated elegance. The pearl earrings caught the light as I moved, and the gold necklace sat perfectly at my collarbone. I studied myself in the full-length mirror, and for the first time in 3 years, I saw Isabel Blackwood staring back at me. Not Elena Rodriguez, wearing a costume, but the woman I'd been before Marcus Wellington tried to erase me from the world. The drive to Napa Valley took 2 hours, winding through rolling hills covered in late summer vineyards. I'd rented a black BMW for the occasion, something that would fit in among the luxury vehicles that would fill the Rosewood Estates parking area. As I drove, I reviewed my plan one final time. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 4 o'clock, with cocktails and dinner to follow. The estate was known for its historic chapel, a small stone building that could accommodate about 200 guests. The "speak now or forever hold your peace" moment typically occurred just before the exchange of vows. I would arrive fashionably late, slip in during the opening remarks, and position myself strategically near the back. When the officiant asked if anyone objected to the union, I would stand and speak. What I would say, exactly, was still evolving. I could simply reveal my identity and let the chaos unfold naturally. Or I could make a more dramatic statement, perhaps something about how inappropriate it was to memorialize someone who wasn't actually dead. The most appealing option, though, was to present evidence of Marcus's crimes to the assembled crowd. Nothing quite like a public revelation of embezzlement and attempted murder to spice up a society wedding. My phone buzzed with a text from Grace, "Thinking of you today. Whatever you're facing, you've got this." I smiled, touched by her faith in someone she thought she knew. Grace believed in Elena Rodriguez's strength, but today I would need Isabel Blackwood's ruthlessness. The Rosewood estate was even more beautiful than I remembered from our wedding planning sessions 4 years ago. Rolling hills dotted with ancient oak trees, perfectly manicured gardens, and the historic chapel sitting like a jewel at the heart of it all. I parked among the Bentleys and Teslas, checking my appearance one final time in the rearview mirror. My hands were steady, my breathing calm. 3 years of careful planning had led to this moment. As I walked toward the chapel, I could hear the sound of voices and laughter from the cocktail area. The ceremony was still 30 minutes away, giving me time to observe and position myself strategically. "Excuse me, miss?" A voice behind me made me freeze. I turned slowly, my heart hammering, to find a young man in a server's uniform approaching with a tray of champagne glasses. "Champagne?" he asked with a polite smile. "Thank you," I managed, accepting a glass with fingers that barely trembled. The server moved on, and I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It was going to be a long afternoon. I positioned myself near a towering oak tree that provided both shade and a clear view of the arriving guests. Through the crowd, I began recognizing faces from my old life, business associates, family friends, society figures I'd once known well. None of them looked in my direction. At 3:45, the guests began filing toward the chapel. I waited until most of the crowd had entered before making my own way to the entrance. The stone building was packed, every pew filled with elegantly dressed witnesses to Marcus's new beginning. I slipped into the very back row, settling beside an elderly woman who nodded politely before turning her attention back to the altar. Perfect, inconspicuous but with a clear view of the proceedings, the chapel was decorated with white roses and ivy, elegant in its simplicity. Soft light filtered through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the stone floor. It was exactly the kind of setting I'd once dreamed of for my own wedding. At 4 o'clock precisely, the music began. The wedding party processed down the aisle, bridesmaids in pale blue, groomsmen in classic black. Marcus's best man was someone I didn't recognize, probably a political connection he'd made in the past 3 years. Then came Victoria Ashford, radiant in ivory silk, her father's arm steady beneath her hand. She was beautiful in the way that only truly wealthy women could be: perfect skin, perfect hair, perfect smile that spoke of a lifetime of privilege and security. Finally, my gaze found Marcus at the altar. 3 years had been kind to him. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, lending him a distinguished air that played well with his political ambitions. His suit was impeccably tailored, his posture confident as he watched his bride approach. He looked happy. Genuinely, radiantly happy in a way that made my chest tighten with an emotion I couldn't quite name. The officiant, a bishop, I noted, probably another connection through Victoria's family, smiled at the assembled crowd as Victoria reached the altar. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice carrying easily through the stone chapel, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Marcus Wellington and Victoria Ashford in holy matrimony." I gripped my champagne glass tighter, the crystal warming under my fingers. "Marriage is a sacred bond," the bishop continued, "witnessed by God and celebrated by community. It represents the joining not just of two individuals, but of two families, two futures, two hearts beating as one." Marcus was gazing at Victoria with what appeared to be genuine adoration, and she was returning his look with equal intensity. For a moment, I felt a stab of something that might have been jealousy, not for Marcus, but for the innocent happiness they shared. "Before we proceed with the vows," the bishop said, his voice growing slightly more formal, "I must ask if there is anyone present who knows of any lawful impediment why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony." This was it. The moment I'd been planning for 3 years. I started to stand, then hesitated as the bishop continued speaking. "I also want to take a moment to remember those who cannot be with us today, whose presence we feel in spirit if not in body." My blood ran cold as I realized what was coming. Particularly, we remember Isabel Blackwood, Marcus's first love, whose tragic death reminds us how precious and fragile life can be. Her memory blesses this union and watches over this couple as they begin their new journey together. The chapel was completely silent, every guest respectfully bowing their heads. Marcus's eyes were closed, his expression one of practiced grief that he'd perfected over the past 3 years. Rage flowed through me like molten metal, white-hot and purifying. He was using my supposed death as a blessing for his new marriage, turning my murder into a sentimental moment for his political theater. I stood up, the elderly woman beside me glanced up in confusion, then her eyes widened as she got her first clear look at my face. A murmur began somewhere in the middle of the chapel, spreading outward like ripples in a pond as more guests turned to see what was causing the disturbance. Marcus's eyes snapped open, and his gaze found mine across the crowded chapel. The champagne glass slipped from my nerveless fingers, shattering against the stone floor with a sound like breaking promises. "Hello, Marcus," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "I couldn't help but notice you were memorializing me." "How thoughtful." The last thing I saw before chaos erupted was Victoria's face, beautiful and confused, turning from her groom to the woman who had just risen from the dead to crash her perfect wedding day. The silence that followed my words stretched like a taut wire about to snap. 200 pairs of eyes stared at me, their expressions ranging from confusion to recognition to outright shock. I could practically hear the gears turning in their collective minds as they tried to process what they were seeing. Marcus had gone completely white, his hands gripping the altar rail so tightly his knuckles stood out like mountain peaks. Victoria still held her bouquet, but her perfect composure was cracking around the edges as she looked between her groom and the woman who had just identified herself as his supposedly dead first love. "Security," someone whispered urgently from the front row. I recognized the voice, Governor Ashford, Victoria's father, already calculating the political damage this scene could cause. But before anyone could move, Marcus found his voice. "Isabel?" The word came out as barely more than a croak. He took a step toward me, then stopped, as if approaching a mirage that might disappear if he moved too quickly. "Is it really?" "Oh, it's really me," I said, stepping into the aisle. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a clear path between the altar and where I stood. "Surprise, darling. Did you miss me?" Victoria's bouquet hit the floor with a soft thud, white roses scattering across the stone. "I don't understand," she said, her voice high and tight. "Marcus, who is this woman?" "That," said a familiar voice from the third row, "is Isabel Blackwood." I turned to see Dr. Harrison Westfield, my family's longtime friend and former board member of Blackwood Industries. He was staring at me with a mixture of wonder and something that might have been relief. "Dear God, Isabel, we all thought you were dead." The murmurs began in earnest then, spreading through the chapel like wildfire. Names were whispered, memories shared, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place for those who had known me before my supposed death. "This is impossible," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was looking at me with the expression of a man watching his carefully constructed world crumble in real time. "The accident, the explosion, we identified the body, did you?" I asked, taking another step down the aisle. Or did you identify what you wanted to find? The bishop, clearly out of his depth in this situation, cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps we should postpone the ceremony until this matter can be resolved. No, Victoria said sharply, finding her voice. She bent to retrieve her bouquet, her movements precise despite the tremor in her hands. I want to know what's happening. Right now. She turned to face me fully, and I had to admire her composure. Even in crisis, Victoria Ashford carried herself. Like the governor's daughter, she was bred for public scrutiny and trained to handle unexpected challenges. You're supposed to be dead, she said simply. So I've been told, I replied. Repeatedly, in fact. The newspapers were quite eloquent about my tragic demise. Touching obituaries, beautiful memorial service. I'm particularly fond of the scholarship fund that was established in my memory. Marcus had recovered some of his color, and with it, some of his old confidence. Isabel, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this isn't the time or place, isn't it? I interrupted. Because it seems like the perfect time to me. Here you are, about to marry another woman while memorializing the one you tried to murder. The irony is just too delicious to pass up. A collective gasp went up from the congregation. The word murder hung in the air like smoke, poisoning the carefully orchestrated atmosphere of love and celebration. That's a serious accusation, Governor Ashford said, rising from his seat. He was a tall man with silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that had carried him through decades of political battles. Young lady, I don't know who you think you are, I know exactly who I am, I said, turning to face him. I'm Isabel Blackwood, heir to Blackwood Industries, and the woman your future son-in-law tried to kill 3 years ago in Montenegro. Victoria's face had gone pale beneath her perfect makeup. Father, what is she talking about? But it was Dr. Westfield who answered. Isabel disappeared during a business trip to Montenegro 3 years ago, he said slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. Her rental car went off a mountain road and exploded. The body was burned beyond recognition, but there was enough DNA evidence to confirm her death. DNA evidence that belonged to an innocent woman named Elena Pavlovich, I said, my voice catching slightly on her name. A single mother who Marcus paid to drive my car while I was supposedly safely hidden in his trunk. Except he never intended for either of us to survive. Marcus stepped forward, his expression shifting from shock to something more calculating. Isabel, you're clearly confused. The trauma of the accident, the trauma of discovering your embezzlement scheme, you mean. I reached into my small evening purse and pulled out a USB drive, holding it up for everyone to see. $53 million, Marcus. That's how much you stole from my family's company over the course of 18 months. The chapel erupted. In whispers and gasps. I saw phones being pulled out, fingers already typing messages to spread this juicy piece of gossip to those who weren't present to witness it firsthand. This is ridiculous, Marcus said, but his voice had lost its authority. Isabel, if you're really alive, which I'm still not convinced of, then where have you been for 3 years? Why didn't you contact anyone? Because you tried to kill me, I said simply. And because I needed time to gather evidence of your crimes. I looked around the chapel, making eye contact with several faces I recognized. Evidence that I'm now prepared to share with the authorities. Victoria had been standing frozen during this exchange, but now she turned to Marcus with an expression of dawning horror. Is any of this true? Of course not, Marcus said quickly. Victoria, you know me. You know I would never, do I? She interrupted. Because right now I'm looking at a woman who's supposed to be dead, and she seems to know an awful lot about my fiancé's business dealings. Dr. Westfield stood up, his movement commanding attention. Isabel, if you have evidence of financial wrongdoing at Blackwood Industries, the board needs to see it immediately. Oh, you'll see it, I promised. Along with the FBI, the SEC, and anyone else interested in investigating corporate fraud and attempted murder. The word FBI had an immediate effect on the crowd. This had gone from a society scandal to a potential federal crime, and I could see people already calculating their exit strategies. Governor Ashford was one of them. He moved to his daughter's side, placing a protective hand on her arm. Victoria, we're leaving. Now. No, she said, shaking him off. I need to understand what's happening. She walked down the aisle toward me, her wedding dress rustling against the stone floor. When she was close enough that we could speak without the entire chapel overhearing, she stopped. "Are you really Isabel Blackwood?" she asked quietly. "I am. And Marcus really tried to kill you?" I nodded. "In Montenegro, 3 years ago. The car crash wasn't an accident." Victoria closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, they were bright with unshed tears. "The Memorial Fund," she said. "He insisted on establishing it. Said it was important to honor your memory." "Guilt makes people do strange things," I said gently. Despite everything, I felt sorry for her. Victoria was an innocent victim in this, just as I had been. "The money," she continued. "The expansion of his business, the political connections. It all happened so fast after your death." "Blood money tends to accelerate things," I said. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Instead of answering, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a photo I'd kept hidden for 3 years. It showed Marcus and me at a charity gala 2 months before my supposed death, both of us smiling and looking completely in love. Victoria stared at the image, then at my face, then back at the image. "You look different now. Plastic surgery. And hair dye will do that," I said. "I've been living under the name Elena Rodriguez for the past 3 years. "Where?" "Oregon. Small town called Millfield. I've been working in a bookstore and trying to figure out how to get justice for what Marcus did to me." Victoria's composure finally cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks, leaving tracks in her perfect makeup. "Our whole relationship, was it built on a lie?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe his feelings for you are genuine. But his fortune certainly isn't." Behind us, Marcus was conferring urgently with several men in expensive suits, lawyers, probably, or political advisors trying to figure out how to contain this disaster. Governor Ashford was on his phone, his voice low and urgent as he spoke to someone who could presumably help manage the crisis. "What happens now?" Victoria asked. "Now I take this evidence to the authorities," I said, holding up the USB drive. "Marcus will be arrested, investigated, and hopefully convicted. Your wedding is obviously over." She nodded numbly. "I need to think." "Victoria," I said as she started to turn away. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. You don't deserve to be caught up in this." She paused. "Did you love him? Before?" The question caught me off guard. I thought I did. But looking back, I think I was in love with the man I thought he was, not the man he actually is. Victoria nodded again and walked back toward the altar, where Marcus was waiting with an expression of desperate hope. I couldn't hear their conversation. But I could read their body language, her rigid posture, his pleading gestures. The moment when she pulled the engagement ring from her finger and handed it back to him, the chapel had mostly emptied by now, guests fleeing the scene like survivors of a natural disaster. Only a core group remained, family members, close friends, and those too fascinated by the drama to leave. Dr. Westfield approached me as Victoria walked back down the aisle toward her father. "Isabel, I can't tell you how glad I am that you're alive. When we thought we lost you, it felt like losing family." "Thank you, Harrison," I said, using his first name for the first time since I was a child. "I'm sorry I couldn't reach out sooner." "Your Uncle Robert needs to know about this immediately," he said. "He's been running Blackwood Industries since your supposed death, but if Marcus has been embezzling, Uncle Robert sold Marcus his shares," I said grimly. "At a significant discount, as I recall. I'm guessing Marcus used stolen money to pay for them." Dr. Westfield's face darkened. "We'll need to unravel every transaction, every contract, every deal that's been made in the past 3 years." "That's exactly what I've been doing," I said. "The USB drive contains more than just evidence of the original embezzlement. I've been tracking Marcus's activity since my supposed death, and the corruption goes much deeper than anyone realizes." A commotion near the altar caught my attention. Marcus was arguing with someone, a man I didn't recognize, but who had the bearing and cheap suit of law enforcement. "FBI," Dr. Westfield murmured. "Word travels fast in certain circles." I watched as the agent approached Marcus, badge clearly visible. The conversation was brief, but even from a distance I could see Marcus's shoulders sag in defeat. "Ms. Blackwood." Another agent had appeared at my elbow. "I'm Agent Sarah Chen with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division." I understand you have information relevant to our investigation. I do, I said, handing her the USB drive. 3 years' worth of financial records, communications, and evidence of embezzlement, fraud, and attempted murder. Agent Chen examined the drive. We'll need you to come in for a formal statement. Of course. As I spoke with the agent, I watched Marcus being led away in handcuffs. He looked back once, catching my eye across the chapel. For a moment, the confident politician was gone, replaced by the man I'd once thought I loved, vulnerable, frightened. And finally facing the consequences of his choices, Victoria stood with her father near the chapel doors, still in her wedding dress but looking like a woman who had just watched her entire future collapse. Governor Ashford was speaking rapidly into his phone, probably already crafting a statement about how his family had been deceived by a master manipulator. Ms. Blackwood, Agent Chen said, drawing my attention back to the present. Are you ready to go? I looked around the chapel one last time, at the scattered rose petals, the abandoned altar, the empty pews that had been filled with wedding guests just an hour ago. 3 years of careful planning had led to this moment, and it was everything I'd hoped for and nothing like I'd expected. I'm ready, I said. As we walked toward the exit, I heard footsteps behind me. Victoria had broken away from her father and was hurrying to catch up. Wait, she called. I turned, surprised to see her approaching. Up close, I could see that her tears had smudged her makeup, making her look younger and more vulnerable than the polished politician's daughter she'd appeared to be an hour ago. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For stopping me from marrying a murderer, she said. For having the courage to come forward with the truth. I studied her face, looking for any sign of resentment or anger, but found only genuine gratitude. I'm sorry it had to happen this way, I said. Victoria shook her head. Better now than after I'd spent years building a life with a man who could kill someone he claimed to love. She was right, of course. But as I walked out of the chapel and into the afternoon sunlight, I couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was still to come. Marcus was in custody, the truth was finally out, and justice was beginning to take its course, but I was about to discover that coming back from the dead was the easy part, learning how to live again, that would be the real challenge. The FBI field office in San Francisco was a monument to institutional efficiency, gray walls, fluorescent lighting, and the kind of furniture that prioritized function over comfort. I'd been there for 6 hours, walking agents through 3 years of carefully documented evidence while my entire life story was dissected and verified. Agent Chen sat across from me in interview room 3, surrounded by stacks of printed emails, financial records, and photographs. The USB drive had contained even more information than I'd initially realized. My paranoid documentation habits had captured a web of corruption that extended far beyond Marcus's original embezzlement. Walk me through Montenegro one more time, she said, her pen poised over a legal pad covered in notes. You said you overheard Marcus on the phone? I rubbed my temples, feeling the weight of exhaustion and adrenaline crash. We'd stopped for gas about 20 miles outside Podgorica. I went to use the restroom, and when I came back, I heard him talking to someone about timing. He said, make sure it happens on schedule. Both problems need to disappear tonight. Both problems? Me and Elena Pavlovich. Though I didn't know about her until later. I closed my eyes, remembering the moment everything changed. I realized he wasn't talking about a business deal. The way he said disappear. I knew. Agent Chen made another note. So you hid in his trunk? It was unlocked, and I could hear him coming back to the car. I panicked. The memory still made my stomach clench. I stayed hidden while he drove to the meeting point. That's when I saw them transfer Yelena into my rental car. And you tried to warn her? I tried. The guilt was a physical weight in my chest. But by the time I got out of the trunk, they were already driving away. Marcus and his contact followed in another car. I was supposed to be in that rental car with her. Agent Chen's expression softened slightly. Ms. Blackwood, what happened to Elena Pavlovich wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? I asked. If I hadn't discovered the embezzlement, if I hadn't pushed for a board meeting, if you just. What? Let him steal $53 million? Let him corrupt your family's company? She shook her head. Marcus Wellington made his choices. You're not responsible for his crimes. A knock on the door interrupted us. Another agent entered, carrying a thick folder and wearing the expression of someone who just uncovered something significant. "Agent Chen? We need to talk." They stepped outside, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the scattered evidence of my former life. Through the small window in the door, I could see them having an intense conversation, their voices too low for me to make out the words. When Agent Chen returned, her demeanor had shifted from professionally sympathetic to grimly determined. "Ms. Blackwood, we've been analyzing the financial records you provided, cross-referencing them with Wellington's known associates and business dealings. And the corruption goes much deeper than we initially thought. Wellington wasn't just embezzling from Blackwood Industries, he was running a sophisticated money laundering operation through multiple shell companies." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "How much money are we talking about?" "Conservative estimate? Over $200 million over the past 5 years. Agent Chen sat back down, her expression serious. "This isn't just corporate fraud anymore, Ms. Blackwood. We're looking at potential organized crime connections." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Organized crime? Some of Wellington's business partners have interesting backgrounds. The kind that requires federal protection for witnesses. She paused, letting that sink in. "Which brings me to an important question. Besides the people at the wedding today, who else knows you're alive?" My mouth went dry. "Just Grace Chen, no relation, I assume, who runs the bookstore where I worked in Millfield. But she only knows me as Elena Rodriguez. Anyone else? No. I've been very careful about maintaining my cover identity." Agent Chen nodded. "Good. That needs to continue for now. Wellington's arrest is going to send shockwaves through his organization, and once they realize you're the source of the evidence." She didn't need to finish the sentence. "I'd spent 3 years hiding from Marcus, only to discover that he was apparently connected to people who made him look like an amateur. What do you need me to do?" "For now, nothing. We're placing you in protective custody while we assess the threat level. There's a safe house in Sacramento where you'll be comfortable while we sort this out." Protective custody. After 3 years of freedom, I was going back into hiding, this time with federal babysitters instead of a false identity. What about Blackwood Industries? My Uncle Robert? The board needs to know what's been happening. Dr. Westfield is being briefed as we speak. Your uncle is flying in from New York tonight. They'll be brought up to speed on everything, but they'll be told you're cooperating with an ongoing federal investigation. Nothing more. I thought about Uncle Robert, who'd stepped in to run the company after my supposed death. He'd always been the responsible one, the steady hand who kept Blackwood Industries afloat during family crises. Learning that he'd unknowingly sold the company to the man who'd tried to murder his niece was going to devastate him. "How long?" I asked. "How long what?" "How long will I be in protective custody?" Agent Chen's hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "It depends on how quickly we can roll up Wellington's network and assess the ongoing threat. Could be weeks, could be months." Months. I thought about Grace, probably wondering why I hadn't called. About the small apartment in Millfield with its view of the ocean. About the quiet life I'd built as Elena Rodriguez, not perfect, but peaceful. "There's something else," Agent Chen said, consulting her notes. "Wellington's been granted bail." My blood ran cold. "What?" $2 million, posted by parties unknown. "He'll be under house arrest with electronic monitoring, but he's not in a cell." "How is that possible?" "He's accused of murder. Attempted murder, and the evidence is largely circumstantial without corroborating witnesses. Plus, he has an excellent legal team and political connections." She looked genuinely apologetic. "I'm sorry, Ms. Blackwood. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear." Marcus was free. Maybe confined to his house, but free to communicate with his associates, free to plan, free to orchestrate whatever revenge he thought I deserved for destroying his perfect new life. "When do we leave for Sacramento?" "There's a car waiting downstairs. Agent Rodriguez will be your primary contact. She'll explain the protocols once you're settled." As if summoned by her name, a woman appeared in the doorway. Agent Maria Rodriguez was compact and efficient-looking, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. "Ms. Blackwood? Ready to go?" I gathered my things, the few possessions I'd brought to San Francisco, plus a bag of clothes Agent Chen had arranged for me to purchase during a supervised shopping trip. Everything I owned could fit in 2 small suitcases, a testament to how thoroughly I'd erased my old life. The drive to Sacramento took 2 hours, during which Agent Rodriguez explained the rules of protective custody. No outside contact without clearance. No leaving the safe house without an escort. No discussing my situation with anyone except designated federal personnel. "It's for your own safety," she said as we pulled into the driveway of a modest 2-story house in a residential neighborhood. Wellington's associates are going to be very unhappy when they realize their money laundering operation has been exposed. The safe house was comfortable but sterile, generic furniture, cable television, a fully stocked kitchen, and absolutely no personality. It felt like a hotel room designed by someone who'd never stayed in a hotel. "Your handler will check in twice daily," Agent Rodriguez explained, showing me around. "There's a panic button in every room, and the house is under 24-hour surveillance. Try to get some rest. Tomorrow we'll start going through your evidence in more detail." After she left, I stood in the living room and tried to process everything that had happened in the past 12 hours. This morning I'd been Elena Rodriguez, quietly preparing to confront her past. Now I was Isabel Blackwood again, key witness in a federal investigation, living under government protection from people who apparently had the resources to murder witnesses and make it look like an accident. My phone buzzed, a text from Grace. "Haven't heard from you. Everything okay?" I stared at the message, knowing I couldn't respond honestly. Agent Chen had been clear about maintaining operational security, which meant Grace would continue to worry about Elena Rodriguez while Isabel Blackwood sat in a safe house eating government-provided Chinese takeout. Instead, I typed, "Family situation more complicated than expected. We'll call when I can." It wasn't entirely a lie. That night, I lay in the unfamiliar bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the subtle sounds of surveillance equipment and thinking about the chain reaction I'd set in motion. Marcus's arrest would trigger investigations into his business partners. Those investigations would reveal connections to other crimes, other victims, other cases. The FBI would roll up a network that had probably been operating for years, all because I decided to crash a wedding, but Yelena Pavlovich was still dead. 3 years in the ground while her killer lived freely, even profited from her death. No amount of federal prosecution would bring her back or explain to her family why she'd had to die so Marcus Wellington could cover up his embezzlement. Around midnight, my phone rang. Unknown number, but something made me answer it. "Isabel?" The voice was immediately familiar, Victoria Ashford, sounding exhausted and shaken. "Victoria? How did you get this number?" "Dr. Westfield gave it to me. I hope that's okay." She paused. I needed to talk to someone who would understand. Understand what? What it's like to discover that the person you loved never actually existed. I sat up in bed, surprised by the raw honesty in her voice. "Are you okay?" "No," she said simply. "The FBI spent 4 hours questioning me today. They wanted to know everything about Marcus, our relationship, our finances, our plans. They asked if I knew about his business dealings, if I'd ever suspected anything. Did you?" That's the terrible part, I don't know. Looking back now, there were things that seemed off. The way he never wanted to talk about his work in detail. How he always had cash when other people were using credit cards. The expensive gifts that seemed beyond what his legitimate income should have supported. "You couldn't have known," I said, echoing Agent Chen's words to me. Couldn't I? Or did I just choose not to look too closely because I was enjoying the lifestyle? Victoria's voice caught slightly. "My father's already talking about damage control, about how to spin this so it doesn't hurt his political career. But all I can think about is that woman, Yelena. She had a family, didn't she?" "A daughter," I said quietly. 8 years old. God." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "Have you thought about contacting them? Her family?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Of course I'd thought about it. I'd spent 3 years thinking about it. But how do you explain to a child that her mother died because a stranger had uncovered her boyfriend's crimes? "I want to," I admitted. "But I don't know how." "Maybe that's something we could figure out together," Victoria said. "When this is all over, I mean. Some way to honor her memory that doesn't involve memorial scholarships funded by blood money." It was a generous offer from someone who had every reason to resent me for destroying her life. Victoria, I'm sorry about today. About your wedding, about everything you're going through. Don't be, she said firmly. You saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. I just wish it hadn't cost an innocent woman hers. After we hung up, I lay in the dark thinking about unlikely alliances and the ways trauma could create bonds between strangers. Victoria Ashford and I had both loved Marcus Wellington, both believed in a version of him that had never actually existed. Now we were both dealing with the wreckage of those illusions, but there was a difference. I'd survived Marcus's attempt to kill me and spent 3 years gathering evidence to prove his crimes. Victoria had simply trusted the wrong man and was now facing the consequences of that trust. The question was, what happened next? Tomorrow, the FBI would continue their investigation. Marcus would remain under house arrest, probably planning his defense and calculating which of his associates might turn against him. The media would start digging into the story of the woman who'd risen from the dead to destroy a society wedding, and somewhere in Montenegro, Elena Pavlovich's daughter was growing up without her mother, not knowing that her death had finally been avenged. Justice, I was learning, was more complicated than revenge. But it was also more lasting. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I found myself thinking not about Marcus or the investigation or the danger I might still be in, but about Grace's bookstore and the quiet life I'd built in Millfield. For 3 years, Elena Rodriguez had been my escape from Isabel Blackwood's pain. Now I had to figure out who I was going to be when this was all over. 2 weeks into protective custody, I discovered that safety could be its own kind of prison. The Sacramento safe house had everything I needed to survive and nothing I needed to live. No ocean view, no musty book smell, no Grace bustling around with recommendations for customers who reminded her of characters from novels. Agent Rodriguez knocked on my bedroom door at precisely 8 a.m., just like every morning for the past 14 days. Time for your debrief, Ms. Blackwood. I followed her to the dining room, where my laptop sat surrounded by federal agents and stacks of evidence that seemed to multiply overnight. Today's team included Agent Chen, who'd driven up from San Francisco, and a new face, Agent Williams, from the Organized Crime Task Force. We've made significant progress, Agent Chen announced, settling into her chair with a coffee that smelled infinitely better than the safe house's generic brand. 3 of Wellington's associates have been arrested, and we've frozen assets in 12 different accounts. Any progress on identifying who posted his bail? I asked, taking my usual seat across from the evidence table. Agent Williams, a gruff man in his 50s with the bearing of someone who'd seen too much, shook his head. Shell company based in the Cayman Islands. We're working with international authorities, but these things take time. Time. Everything in federal law enforcement seemed to revolve around time, how much they needed, how little they had, how patience was both a virtue and a luxury they couldn't afford. There's been a development, Agent Rodriguez said, her tone carefully neutral in a way that immediately put me on alert. Wellington's attorney filed a motion yesterday claiming his client is being framed. I felt my stomach drop. Framed? He's alleging that you faked your own death as part of an elaborate scheme to steal money from Blackwood Industries, and that you've now surfaced to destroy Wellington's reputation and frame him for crimes you committed. The absurdity of it was almost laughable. Almost. And people believe this? Wellington's legal team is very good, Agent Chen said diplomatically. They're claiming you had access to company accounts, motive to disappear, and 3 years to manufacture evidence. What about Elena Pavlovich? What about the woman who actually died? Agent Williams leaned forward. They're saying she was your accomplice who died in an accidental explosion while helping you stage your death. They've even produced witnesses who claim to have seen you in Montenegro after the supposed date of your death. Manufactured witnesses. Of course. I should have expected this from Marcus. When in doubt, muddy the waters and shift blame to the victim. There's more, Agent Rodriguez continued. Wellington's team has requested permission for him to give a television interview. They want to present his side of the story to the public. I stared at her in disbelief. A man accused of murder and money laundering wants to go on TV? A man under house arrest with an ankle monitor and excellent lawyers who know how to manipulate public opinion, Agent Chen corrected. His attorney is claiming that Wellington is being persecuted by a vindictive ex-fiancé who's orchestrated an elaborate revenge scheme. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to get justice for what Marcus had done, I'd given him a new narrative to exploit, the wronged businessman being destroyed by a vengeful woman. What does this mean for the case? It means we need to move faster, Agent Williams said. Public opinion can influence jury pools, and Wellington's team knows it. They're trying to get ahead of the evidence by controlling the narrative. My phone buzzed with a text message. Agent Rodriguez glanced at the screen and frowned. It's from Victoria Ashford. She wants to meet with you. Here? But this location is supposed to be secure. Not here. She's requesting permission to visit you at a neutral location with full security. Agent Rodriguez looked up from the phone. She says it's urgent. 2 hours later, I found myself in a sterile conference room at the FBI field office in Sacramento, waiting for Victoria Ashford to arrive. Agent Rodriguez sat in the corner, present but attempting to be unobtrusive. When Victoria walked in, I barely recognized her. Gone was the polished politician's daughter from the wedding, replaced by a woman who looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than Elena Rodriguez's monthly rent but looked almost casual compared to her usual attire. "Isabel," she said, taking the seat across from me. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." Agent Rodriguez said it was urgent. Victoria glanced at the agent, then back at me. "Have you seen the news?" I shook my head. The safe house had cable, but I'd been avoiding news coverage of my own situation. Victoria pulled out her phone and showed me a video clip. It was Marcus, sitting in what looked like his home office, being interviewed by a sympathetic reporter. He looked haggard but sincere, like a man bearing up under false accusations with dignity. "I loved Isabel deeply," his voice came through the phone speaker. "Her supposed death devastated me. But now I'm beginning to wonder if the woman I loved ever really existed, or if she was always capable of this level of deception and manipulation." I felt sick. "Turn it off." "There's more," Victoria said, but she paused the video. "He's claiming that your evidence was fabricated during the 3 years you were in hiding. He says you used your knowledge of the company's systems to create false financial records that implicate him in crimes he never committed." "That's impossible." "The FBI verified, I know. But he's not talking to the FBI. He's talking to potential jurors who might serve on his case, and to the court of public opinion." Victoria leaned forward. "Isabel, he's very convincing. If I didn't know better, if I hadn't been there when you walked into that chapel, you'd believe him." "Maybe. He's always been persuasive. It's part of what made him so attractive." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "There's something else. The interview wasn't just a defense, it was a threat." "What do you mean?" Victoria restarted the video. Marcus's voice filled the small conference room again. "I understand that this woman, whoever she really is, may have convinced law enforcement that she's the victim in this situation. But I have to wonder, what else is she capable of? What other lives might she be willing to destroy to protect herself? I just hope no one else gets hurt before the truth comes out." The implied threat was clear enough that even Agent Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "He's telling his associates that you're a problem that needs to be solved," Victoria said quietly. "And he's doing it on national television where he can't be accused of directly ordering anything." I thought about the comfortable safe house, the agents who checked on me twice daily, the security measures that had started to feel routine. "Do you think they're enough? The protections the FBI has put in place?" "I don't know," Victoria admitted. "But I know Marcus, and I know the kind of people he associates with now. They don't forgive, and they don't forget." Agent Rodriguez cleared her throat. "Ms. Ashford, if you have specific information about threats, I don't," Victoria said quickly. "But I know Marcus well enough to read between the lines. That interview wasn't just public relations, it was instructions." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of that realization settling over us. Marcus had found a way to orchestrate my destruction while under house arrest and electronic monitoring, using the media as his weapon and public sympathy as his shield. "There's something else," Victoria said. "I've been thinking about what you said about Yelena Pavlovich's daughter." The change of subject caught me off guard. "What about her?" "I've been researching the situation in Montenegro, trying to understand what happened to her family after Yelena's death." Victoria pulled out a folder from her purse. "Her name is Anna. She's 11 now, living with her grandmother in a village outside Podgorica. They're struggling financially. Elena was their primary support. I stared at the photo Victoria showed. Me, a dark-haired girl with serious eyes that looked far too old for her face. How did you find this? I hired a private investigator. Someone who specializes in international cases. Victoria hesitated. Isabel, they're living in poverty. The grandmother is sick, and Anna is basically raising herself. The guilt that I'd been carrying for 3 years intensified into something almost unbearable. What do you want me to do about it? I want us to help them. Together. Victoria's voice was firm with conviction. I have resources, connections, money that Marcus never touched because it came from my family, not his business dealings. And you have the truth about what happened to Elena. The FBI won't let me travel to Montenegro. I'm in protective custody. Not now, Victoria agreed. But eventually this will be over. Marcus will be convicted or acquitted, his associates will be dealt with, and you'll be free to live your life again. When that happens, I think we owe it to Elena to make sure her daughter has a future. I studied Victoria's face, looking for any sign that this was some kind of manipulation or guilt trip. But all I saw was genuine determination and a grief that matched my own. Why? I asked. Why do you care about a stranger's child in Montenegro? Because Marcus took everything from her family, just like he tried to take everything from you. Because she's the one innocent victim in all of this who has no voice, no advocates, no one fighting for her. Victoria's voice caught slightly. And because helping her is the only way I can think of to make something good come out of this nightmare. Agent Rodriguez was taking notes, probably documenting Victoria's proposal for the case file. It occurred to me that everything we said in this room would become part of the permanent record, evidence in a case that was growing more complex by the day. There's something else you should know, Victoria continued. My father wants me to distance myself from this entire situation. He's worried about the political implications of being connected to a major federal investigation. And I told him to go to hell. Victoria's smile was small but genuine. Turns out there are more important things than political careers. I thought about Grace, probably wondering if Elena Rodriguez was ever coming back to work. About Uncle Robert, dealing with the revelation that his company had been infiltrated by criminals. About Dr. Westfield and the other board members, trying to untangle years of fraudulent transactions. Everyone touched by Marcus's crimes was dealing with consequences they'd never asked for. But Victoria was right, Anna Pavlovich was the only one who'd lost everything without even knowing why. If we do this, I said slowly, if we try to help Elena's family, it has to be done right. No grand gestures, no publicity, nothing that could be traced back to Marcus's stolen money. Agreed. And we wait until the investigation is over. I won't risk compromising the case. Of course. Agent Rodriguez looked up from her notes. Ms. Blackwood, I should remind you that any contact with foreign nationals related to this case needs to be cleared through the Bureau. Understood, I said. Then, to Victoria, why are you really doing this? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photo of Anna Pavlovich. Because I spent 3 years planning a wedding to a man who murdered someone's mother, and I need to believe that my life can be about more than just recovering from that mistake. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to me since this whole situation began. Okay, I said. When this is over, we'll help her. Together. Victoria smiled, the first genuine expression of happiness I'd seen from her since the wedding. Thank you. After she left, Agent Rodriguez and I sat in the conference room while she finished her notes. Outside the windows, Sacramento traffic moved with purpose, people going about their lives without federal protection or organized crime threats or the weight of a dead woman's memory on their shoulders. Do you think it's really over? I asked. The immediate danger, I mean. Agent Rodriguez closed her notebook. Wellington's interview was a calculated risk. He got his message out, but he also gave us more evidence of witness intimidation and obstruction of justice. Sometimes criminals are their own worst enemies. And sometimes they're very good at staying one step ahead of law enforcement. True, she admitted. But you're not alone in this, Ms. Blackwood. We're good at our jobs. And we don't give up easily. As we drove back to the safe house, I thought about Anna Pavlovich growing up without her mother, about Victoria Ashford trying to build something meaningful from the wreckage of her destroyed engagement, about Grace Chen probably marking my employment file's abandoned position, and wondering what had happened to the quiet woman who'd worked among her books for 3 years. Justice was supposed to feel satisfying, but all I felt was tired. Marcus was under house arrest but still dangerous. His associates were being rounded up but new threats were emerging. I was safe but trapped, protected but isolated. The only thing that felt clear was the promise Victoria and I had made to each other about Yelena's daughter. It wasn't justice, nothing could bring Yelena back, but it was something concrete, something we could actually accomplish. Sometimes, I was learning, the smallest acts of redemption were the only ones that mattered. That night, I called Grace. "Elena?" Her voice was bright with relief. I was starting to worry. "I'm okay," I said, though it wasn't entirely true. "The family situation is more complicated than I expected. When are you coming back?" I stared out the safe house window at the suburban street, lit by street lamps and the glow of television screens in other people's living rooms. "I don't know. Maybe never." Grace was quiet for a moment. "Is there anything I can do?" "Just remember me kindly," I said. "And maybe keep my favorite coffee mug in case I ever make it back." After I hung up, I realized I was crying, for Elena Rodriguez's simple life, for Yelena Pavlovich's stolen future, for the woman I'd been before Marcus Wellington taught me that love and trust could be weaponized, but also, somehow, for the possibility that something better might be waiting on the other side of all this darkness. 6 months later, I stood in the visitors' gallery of a federal courthouse in San Francisco, watching Marcus Wellington receive a sentence of 25 years to life for murder, conspiracy, money laundering, and racketeering. The man in the orange jumpsuit bore little resemblance to the confident groom who'd tried to memorialize me at his wedding. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom. The defendant showed a callous disregard for human life in his pursuit of wealth and power. The murder of Yelena Pavlovich was not a crime of passion but a calculated elimination of an innocent woman whose only mistake was trusting the wrong person. Victoria sat beside me, her hand finding mine as Marcus was led away in shackles. He didn't look back, didn't try to catch my eye one final time. For him, I suspect, I had already ceased to exist the moment his appeals ran out. "It's over," Victoria whispered, but it wasn't. Not yet. 2 weeks later, Victoria and I boarded a flight to Montenegro, our first trip together to the country where everything had changed. Agent Rodriguez had finally cleared me for international travel, the threat from Marcus's associates having diminished significantly after their network was dismantled. 14 arrests, over 300 million in seized assets, and a crime syndicate that would take years to rebuild, if it ever could. The flight gave us time to finalize our plans. We'd spent months working with international lawyers to establish a trust fund for Anna Pavlovich, carefully structured to avoid any connection to Marcus's tainted money. Victoria had liquidated some of her family's legitimate investments, while I had contributed what remained of my Swiss accounts, money that had been mine before Marcus ever entered my life. "Are you nervous?" Victoria asked as our plane descended toward Podgorica airport. "Terrified," I admitted. "What do you say to a child whose mother died because of your existence?" "You tell her the truth," Victoria said simply. Age-appropriate truth, but truth nonetheless. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for. Dr. Elena Merrick, our contact from the Montenegrin Ministry of Social Welfare, met us at the airport. She was a warm woman in her 50s who specialized in international adoption and family welfare cases. Over the past 3 months, she'd been working with us to arrange this meeting while protecting Anna's privacy and emotional well-being. "Anna is a remarkable child," Dr. Merrick told us as we drove through the mountainous countryside toward Yelena's village. "Very intelligent, very mature for her age. But also very guarded. She's learned not to trust easily." The village was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 50 houses scattered across a hillside overlooking a valley that must have been breathtaking in better circumstances. Now it just looked poor, cracked roads, aging buildings, the kind of rural poverty that tourism brochures never showed. Anna's grandmother, Milena Pavlovich, lived in a modest house with a garden that showed signs of careful tending despite obvious neglect in other areas. She greeted us at the door with the dignity of someone who'd raised children and buried a daughter, and refused to let either experience break her. "Anna is at school," she explained in careful English, gesturing for us to sit at a worn wooden table. She comes home at 3 o'clock. Dr. Merrick translated as Milena told us about the past 3 years, Yelena's death, the financial struggles, Anna's academic excellence despite everything. The girl was at the top of her class, dreaming of university and a life beyond the village. But those dreams seemed impossible without resources. She asks about her mother sometimes, Milena said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. She knows there was an accident, but not the details. I think she suspects there is more to the story. At 3:15, we heard footsteps on the front path. Anna Pavlovich entered the house with the cautious grace of someone who'd learned to read rooms quickly and assess threats instinctively. She was small for 11, with her mother's dark hair and serious dark eyes that took in Victoria and me with intelligent curiosity. Dr. Merrick spoke to her in Montenegrin, explaining who we were and why we'd come. Anna listened without interruption, her expression growing more guarded with each word. Finally, she spoke directly to me in English that was accented but clear. "You are the woman my mother died instead of." The bluntness of it took my breath away. "Yes," I said. "I am." "And you came here because you feel guilty?" "Yes," I said again. "But also because I wanted to meet you, and to tell you that your mother was brave and kind, and that her death meant something." Anna studied my face for a long moment. What did it mean? It meant that a very bad man was stopped before he could hurt more people. It meant that justice was possible, even when it took a long time to arrive. I paused, choosing my words carefully. And it meant that people who cared about doing the right thing were inspired to help the family she left behind. Victoria stepped forward, kneeling so she was at Anna's eye level. "We can't bring your mother back," she said gently. "But we can make sure you have the opportunities she would have wanted for you. Education, choices, a future where you can honor her memory by living the life she dreamed for you." Anna looked between us, then at her grandmother, then back at us. "What kind of help?" Dr. Merrick opened the folder she'd been carrying and spread documents across the table: trust fund paperwork, educational grants, housing assistance, healthcare coverage. Everything designed to give Anna the stability and opportunities that Yelena's death had stolen from her. "Full university tuition, wherever you want to study," Victoria explained. "Living expenses, books, everything you need to pursue any career you choose. Plus immediate assistance for your grandmother's medical care and improvements to your home." Anna read through the documents with the careful attention of someone far older than 11. "Why?" she asked finally. "Because your mother died for something she didn't understand, caught up in someone else's crime," I said. "Because you deserve better than growing up poor in a village with no opportunities. Because sometimes the only way to honor the dead is to take care of the living they left behind." The girl was quiet for a long time, staring at the papers that represented a completely different future than the one she'd been expecting. Finally, she looked up at me. "Will you tell me about her death? The real story?" I glanced at Dr. Merrick, who nodded slightly. "When you're older, if you still want to know, I'll tell you everything. But for now, what matters is that she died because someone evil needed to hide his crimes, and her death helped make sure he was caught and punished." "Is he in prison now?" "Yes. For the rest of his life." Anna nodded solemnly. "Good." We spent the rest of the afternoon talking about practical matters: how the trust fund would work, educational opportunities, what kind of support Anna and her grandmother would need. But what struck me most was the girl's composure, her ability to absorb life-changing information and ask intelligent questions about her future. "She has her mother's strength," Milena said quietly as Anna showed Victoria her school notebooks, filled with careful handwriting and mathematical equations that looked advanced for her age. As evening approached, it was time for us to return to Podgorica. Anna walked us to the car, carrying herself with a dignity that reminded me painfully of the woman she'd lost. "Will I see you again?" she asked. "If you want to," I said. "We'll be checking on your progress, making sure you have everything you need. And when you're older, if you ever want to visit America, or if you need anything at all." Anna nodded. Then, surprising me, she stepped forward and hugged me briefly. "Thank you for stopping the bad man," she whispered. The drive back to Podgorica was quiet, both Victoria and I lost in our own thoughts. At the hotel, we sat on the balcony overlooking the city, drinking wine and processing what we'd accomplished. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Victoria asked. I think we did the only thing we could live with, I replied. The money won't bring Elena back, but at least Anna won't grow up in poverty because of what Marcus did to her mother. What happens now? For you, I mean. I'd been asking myself the same question for weeks. The trial was over, the investigation closed, my protective custody officially ended. I was free to be anyone I wanted to be, but I wasn't sure who that was anymore. Elena Rodriguez's quiet life in Millfield felt like a dream from someone else's past. Isabel Blackwood's world of corporate boardrooms and high society had been permanently tainted by Marcus's betrayal. I was caught between identities, belonging fully to neither. I don't know, I admitted. I've been thinking about staying in Oregon, maybe opening my own bookstore. Gracian offered to help me learn the business before I left for the trial. That sounds peaceful. What about you? Victoria smiled. My father's still hoping I'll marry into another political family and pretend none of this ever happened. I'm thinking about law school instead. International law, maybe working with organizations that help crime victims. It was a good plan, one that would honor everything she'd learned from her experience with Marcus while using her privileges for something meaningful. 3 months later, I stood behind the counter of Second Chances Books in downtown Millfield, watching Grace train me on the inventory system she'd designed for her own store. She'd sold me Chen's books when she decided to retire, keeping only a small apartment upstairs and the right to give unsolicited advice to customers. You're different, she observed, watching me shelve a collection of mystery novels. More settled, somehow. Like you finally figured out who you're supposed to be. Maybe I did, I said, thinking about the letter I'd received from Anna Pavlovich the week before. She was excelling in her new school, already talking about studying international business or journalism. Her English was improving rapidly, and she'd included a photo of herself with her grandmother, both of them smiling in front of their newly renovated house. The letter had been addressed to Isabel Rodriguez, a name that felt right in a way that neither of my previous identities ever had. I was keeping Isabel's strength and Elena's peace, creating something new from the pieces of both women. Victoria visited every few months, usually bringing updates on Anna's progress or stories from her law school classes. Sometimes we talked about Marcus, about the trial, about the strange bond that had formed between us through shared trauma. But mostly we talked about the future, Anna's education, Victoria's career plans, my growing bookstore business. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't gone to the wedding? Victoria asked during her most recent visit. I considered the question while boxing up an order for a customer in Portland. Marcus would still be free. His associates would still be running their criminal network. Anna would still be growing up in poverty. And you'd be married to a murderer. And you'd still be Elena Rodriguez, working in someone else's bookstore and hiding from your past. True, I admitted. But I'm not sure that would have been a bad thing. Do you regret it? Everything that happened? I thought about Elena Pavlovich, whose death had finally been acknowledged and honored. About the 14 criminals who were now in prison instead of preying on other victims. About Anna, whose future was now bright with possibilities her mother would have been proud of. No, I said finally. I regret that it took so long, and I regret that Elena had to die for it to happen. But I don't regret seeking justice. The bell above the door chimed, and a customer entered, a young woman with tired eyes and the kind of careful posture that suggested she was carrying troubles too heavy for her shoulders. Can I help you? I asked. I'm looking for something to read, she said hesitantly. Something about new beginnings, I guess. Starting over when everything falls apart. I smiled, remembering all the times Grace had done this for me, reading customers' needs in their faces and finding exactly the right book to meet them where they were. I have just the thing, I said, leading her toward the fiction section. As I helped her find the perfect novel about resilience and redemption, I caught my reflection in the shop's front window. Isabel Rodriguez looked back at me, auburn hair fading to natural brown, face settling into lines of contentment rather than fear, posture relaxed in a way that Elena had never quite managed and Isabel had forgotten was possible. I was no longer the woman who'd died in Montenegro or the one who'd hidden in Oregon. I wasn't the person who'd crashed Marcus Wellington's wedding or the victim who'd testified at his trial. I was someone new, someone who'd chosen to build a life focused on helping others find the stories they needed, on honoring the dead by caring For the living, on believing that justice and peace weren't mutually exclusive. Outside, the Oregon coast stretched toward the horizon, vast and forgiving and full of possibilities. Inside, my bookstore hummed with quiet purpose, shelves lined with stories of people who'd survived terrible things and found ways to make meaning from their survival. It wasn't the life I'd planned when I was Isabel Blackwood, or the life I'd thought I wanted when I was Elena Rodriguez. But it was my life, built from the ashes of both women and something entirely my own. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies, it's outliving them, outgrowing them, and building something beautiful from the wreckage they left behind. Marcus Wellington would spend the rest of his life in prison. But I would spend the rest of mine helping people find the stories they needed to heal, and that, I thought as I rang up my customer's purchase and watched her leave with hope in her eyes, was justice enough. The end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.